Well, today's guest has more than 2 decades of experience in the energy efficiency sector. Currently, her organisation, BidConnecter, is a leader in the implementation of energy-saving measures.
We are now a business that turns over about £20 million a year.
Which is helping so many households have warmer and more comfortable homes to reside in.
I really hope they had better life opportunities and better life choices because they were living in warm houses.
What do you particularly find as most rewarding aspect of being in this?
Helping people.
She's an absolute trailblazer in the industry, inspiring and encouraging more women to get involved in the green construction sector.
I remember sitting in front of a guy once and he said, well, how are you going to cope on site? You're wearing heels. It's a drop in the ocean.
Absolutely, yeah. She's none other than Rachel Cole. Rachel, welcome to the EWI Procast.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having me. It's an absolute privilege to be here. I'm sure you're going to put me through my paces.
Brilliant. Well, I do apologise. We've just off camera, I said, trying not to catch you or trick you with anything, but then, I gave you some questions to sort of prepare for this interview, but then, I outfoxed you by saying, I've actually kind of rewritten some of the stuff at the top of the header. So, but hopefully, I think with the first 2 easy questions, you'll kind of like that introduction as we get into the podcast. So, Rachel, a lot to kind of get through. Tell us about BidConnecter. Tell us about some of the wonderful things it gets involved with.
BidConnecter was set up originally, back in the day, as an IT consultancy business by my current business partner, Martin. And I have been in this industry, as you've correctly said, for 22 years. And he was looking at diversifying and suggested to me that it might be a good plan if we work together. And I was like, well, it's a big risky industry, And he said, but I've got you. What could possibly go wrong? So in around 2018, I was made redundant from the company I was working for and looking for a job. And you mentioned empowering women. And as a woman in her 50s, I found that as soon as people looked at my CV and realised I had O-levels, that my CV got paper sifted out. Okay. So I accepted Martin's kind offer and we pooled some cash and we set up BidConnecter. Originally, BidConnecter was going to look after SMEs in the construction industry to access more government contracts. So local authority and central government contracts. So that's why the word bid is in there. And it's interesting you mentioned the connector part, which everybody
Connecting
spells.
2 parts.
Everybody spells. OR is actually spelled ER because it is an interchangeable adjective.
Okay.
But BidConnecter now, in its current iteration, since the 16th of November 2018, when we made our first carbon trade under what was then Eco2T, has been an eco-managing...
What does the T stand for?
Transition.
Okay.
So it was, but when the government can't think of a scheme to go between schemes, they make a T. Although the last one was an I, which stands for interim. Don't ask me why. I'm not the government. So on the 16th of November, we made our first carbon trade, and we haven't really looked back since. We are now a business that turns over about £20 million a year. We have 53 staff at the last count. We've got quite a large head office in Worthing. We are also a principal contractor. So as well as trading eco-carbon credits with the big energy companies, we're a principal contractor. We've run contracts in London, in East Sussex. And we're currently the incumbent fabric provider for Shropshire Council on the HUG Home Upgrade Grant scheme in Shropshire, helping the good folk of Shropshire. So there's a few other things that we do. We look after local authority flex for some local authorities that don't have the in-house resources to manage their own flex. So we have an arm's length service that we provide for them.
Well, listen, we'll get into a lot more detail. That's a brilliant brilliant summary there. So tell us. Let's go back a little bit in time, and specifically this sector. So let's call it the green construction sector. So you being a woman yourself, what how do you see the opportunities, and did you find that there were barriers at the time when you first joined, and how did you overcome those barriers, if there were barriers when you first looked at it?
There are barriers. I think as a woman in management positions, which I've pretty much been most of my life, there's still quite a lot of misogyny and misunderstanding out there. I remember sitting in front of a guy once, and we were talking about a low carbon retrofit project, and he wasn't really sure about appointing me to look after the project for him. And he said, "Well, how are you going to cope on site?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, you're wearing heels." So, I kind of get that this goes on. We are largely a female organisation, which is probably more by happenstance than any kind of strategic planning. But I'm very much a believer in empowering women, because we can have suitable skills in this industry, certainly to understand the technical sides, technical aspects of installations, understanding some of the building fabric issues you might face, being able to be effective project managers, having the softer skills to make sure we can bring together supply chains. So I think we've got a great deal to offer. And I'm very proud of the women that work for us. And interestingly, our SMT, with the exception of Martin, is entirely formed of women. I think because of our location, we haven't been able to recruit people with knowledge. So we haven't been able to recruit people that have worked for our competitors and things like that. So most of the people that have worked for us have been promoted from within. And that's also really rewarding.
So investment training, putting through the paces, and really kind of seeing that development journey as they go along. And
it's great to see the journey.
Yes.
And as an employer, it's really rewarding when you get that mortgage application come through, because so-and-so's buying a house and they feel confident enough in their job and the longevity of the business and the strength of the business and the sustainability of their role, that they can sign up for a 35-year debt. So, I think last year, seven of our team managed to get their foot on the property ladder for the first time, and that's a great thing.
Amazing. Well, listen, so that's a bit about the empowerment, but going back a little bit about Rachel Colt yourself, and let's look at the kind of the business opportunity side of it. So doing the research, so in terms of your background, was a telecommunications background some while ago, and am I correct, that goes back into the 90s when we had the boom in mobile telephony and internet ISPs and all sorts of those wonderful things. So was it at the time, as you were kind of transitioning into kind of the retrofit market, did you see that opportunity in a new sector? Because you saw kind of all of the explosion will happen in telcos, and then you could sort of sense where the next opportunities were like. What was the kind of...
Well, my history actually starts before I worked for BT, because I was actually a burger flipper in my early years. So I worked for McDonald's from when I was doing my A-levels, and was their youngest ever store manager, opening a drive-through restaurant at the tender age of 21 in near Lakeside shopping centre in West Thurrock. And after my son was born, I thought, I need to get into some kind of proper career now. I'd done quite a few years with McDonald's, been hugely successful, graduated from Hamburger University,
Very good.
And then I saw an opportunity to go and work in retail in British Telecom as a retail officer, demonstrating business products to business people.
Was that in their Great Portland Street office, or...?
No, that was in Lakeside.
Okay.
And I was headhunted by a sales manager. So I'd only been there about 15 months, and this sales manager called Tony Harris decided that he wanted me to go and head up one of his sales teams in the commercial road. near Aldgate One-Way System in London. And I'm still friends with these people now, so I'm sure they'll forgive me for saying, but they were one of the most underperforming sales teams. But yeah, we turned it around, and I went on to a very successful career, 10 years with British Telecom. And it was interesting. It was at the time of deregulation. So when I first joined British Telecom, you could kind of buy a PABX system in two colours. You know, we used to call it was either IBM beige or grey. You know, there were your choices. And BT would install it as and when they got round to it, because there was nobody else that could install it. And if you wanted a new business line, it might take, a couple of months, if you're lucky. But of course, there was deregulation in the industry. So BT was no longer part of the GPO, which was the General Post Office. The changes were phenomenal. So
is that when they spun out the mobile network, the BT?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So my good friend did the IPO for what was originally going to be called MM02 for Millennium, and was subsequently dropped to just the O and the 2. But the change was phenomenal, because we went from selling minutes. So all of our sales targets were based on minutes, but nobody buys minutes now, because no one has minutes, because everything is bundled. And we sort of progressed. I ended up being the account director for IKEA, which is a global account. And I was instrumental in setting up a 36-country wide area network for them, which was real bleeding edge technology at the time, in the sort of late 90s, of original voice over IP. So I had a fantastic career. I won the Masters when I was at BT, which was the pinnacle of any sales career. And then my dad died. And I was working 70 hours a week, and my dad had just retired. He was 64. He'd been retired for exactly 6 months, and he got pancreatic cancer. And I questioned my reason for being, if you like.
Yes.
So I decided to leave. And I went from a very well-paid, high-flying job to going to work for Thurrock Council as an energy officer. So in between leaving BT...
What was that, early 2000s?
Yeah, so 2001.
Okay.
So in between leaving BT and joining Thurrock Council, I researched industries, because I could see that telecoms was going to go in a completely different direction. And I could also see, working for a big corporate, that when I joined BT 10 years before, they had 218,000 staff. And when I left, they had 105,000. So as technology improved, a lot of the processes were just not going to require human beings anymore. And I researched an industry, and I remember talking to my friends, and they said, "Why are you applying for this job on this really rubbish salary at Thurrock Council?" And I said, "Because I think in 20 years' time, people will be fighting wars over energy." And that was one of the predictions I wish hadn't come true. But it is absolutely true now. So I figured it would be an industry that would take me to my eventual retirement. And that was 22 years ago, and here I am still doing it. And I think I chose energy because it was like a metered service. So, it was like telecoms was metered, energy was metered. I remember researching for my interview, because I knew nothing. So I was really winging this interview with Thurrock Council. So I researched, I learned all of the Acts of Parliament, from the Home Energy Conservation Act of 1995 and the Warm Homes and Energy Conservation Act of 2001. And I'd learned all of these Acts of Parliament because there'd been such a big seismic change in energy conservation. And I did loads of research, absolutely smashed the interview, which was great. And Thurrock Council was, at the time, I think, probably a 3-minute drive from my house. And as I was putting the key in the door, I got a phone call saying, "Oh, you've got the job." So that was great. I remember going and reporting to my boss on the first day, and in the property services department at Thurrock Council, and he took me on a drugs eviction to a void property. So I had to stop off at stores to get some toe detectors before I was allowed to walk on this contaminated floor area. But yeah, during my time there, I did a couple of some really big retrofits on a couple of some high-rise buildings in Tilbury with external wall insulation. So it's one of my first projects. But I also got all the meters read and saved them about 300 grand, I think, in the first year.
Yeah, and that sort of comes onto my so that was the, let's say, the commercial opportunity side of it. But was that then the impacts as you saw the properties and them going through the transformation and actually changing the lives of the people that live there? That was that people aspect and impacts.
I mean, interestingly, Thurrock has two of the most deprived wards if you look at the indices of multiple deprivation, there are two wards in Thurrock which have the the lowest indices of multiple deprivation. And I think certainly what I've seen in my 22 years is the stark impacts of fuel poverty on people, not just the impacts on their health, but the impacts on social isolation, especially with older people. Older people don't ask for help. If they can't afford to put the heating on, they'll sit there in the cold.
And won't complain.
And they're not putting their hand up for any help. And, I've always tried to do sort of outreach so that you can find the hard-to-reach people because they don't put their hand up. You will have some people that will ask for every grant that's possibly going. And I think it's also the impact on kids. If you live in a cold home, you don't invite your mates round. If you live in a cold home, you might not actually want to go back there. You might spend time elsewhere, possibly get into a bit of trouble. You've got nowhere warm and safe to do your homework. It really is pervasive. And, everyone sort of says, people are going to die of hypothermia in cold homes. People don't die of hypothermia in cold homes. But they do get, their blood thickens. If you're cold for a very long time, your blood gets thicker. If your blood gets thicker, you get circulatory, pulmonary disorders. If you're living in a cold home that's prone to damp and condensation, you're going to get breathing difficulties, particularly impactful on the young. And I think over the years, I'm very proud to have been involved in so many of the government schemes and helped as many people as I possibly could. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things about it. But there's also the other side of it, that you're actually making a change to our dying environment. It's so important that we get behind it. I mean, if we look at what's going on with our weather systems, it's not stopped raining since last July. This is not something that we can continue to tolerate. And, I'm not necessarily sure that we've got time to change.
Well, listen.
But we have got time to mitigate. We have got time to bring people out of fuel poverty.
Yes.
And have warm and healthy homes.
Well, that perfectly moves into today, and going specifically what we talked on top of the hour about the funding mechanisms that are there. So, do you want to just explain? Do you want to explain what ECO is? What's it short for? And who does it actually help?
So the Energy Company Obligation, Iteration 4, which is what we're in now, for short, ECO4, is an obligation that's placed on energy companies that have more than 3,000 domestic customers to promote energy-saving measures into domestic dwellings. But there is a mechanism, there's a framework around it. So there's an eligibility criteria that is for people that can apply for it, and there's also a property criteria. So ECO4 is probably the first whole house retrofit programme that's been attempted at scale. It was preceded by, unsurprisingly, ECO3 and unsurprisingly ECO2, although, as I think I said before, there was ECO2T in the middle where they run out of ideas what to do for ECO3. But ECO3 enables people in receipt of income-related, means-tested benefits to access grant funding for fabric improvements, which will include wall insulation, roof insulation, floor insulation. Does include windows and doors, but very low rates of funding.
And would you say Eco4 is the first whole house approach?
It sort of is, but obviously, because I've been doing this for a million years, I also remember a previous whole house approach scheme called CESP, which was the Community Energy Saving Programme, which I think finished in 2012. Although I might have to look at my notes in a moment, but I don't want to look down because, as I said before the interview, I don't want to look like a psychopath.
And that's different to us. It's different to a CESP. Is different to a CERT. Yeah.
So it's different to CERT, which was the carbon emissions reduction target.
Very
CESP
good.
was the Community Energy Savings Programme. So you might catch me out on a few acronyms, but not those two.
You won't really. But anyway, yeah.
Anyway, where was I?
So tell us a bit about the eligibility criteria, because you're talking about incomes, but there's also postcode related stuff, isn't it, as well? So explain the difference.
There's 3 ways to be eligible for Eco4. Either you're in receipt of income-related means-tested benefits, or you are eligible because your local authority is running an Eco4 eligibility program, and that's known as LA Flex. Or your supplier has recommended you to be eligible under Supplier Flex. And the two together are nicely known as LASFlex, LA and Supplier Flex. And I always imagine a nightclub in Ibiza when I talk about LASFlex. I'm just going to pop down LASFlex. So they're the ways that you can be eligible, but you have to live in a house that is either EF or G rated. In the main, the vast majority of the targets for E, F and G rated properties. And your property must be able to achieve, once the improvements are made, the minimum requirement. And the minimum requirement is effectively a 2-jump EPC rating. I have some notes, but I'm not going to look at them because I don't want to look like a psychopath. But I do have some notes.
Just a quick question to you. So in Eco4, what elements of the Bonfield review went into the thinking behind designing that scheme?
So the Bonfield review, which I've read from cover to cover, the Each Home Counts review, came about as a result of some failed previous energy obligation schemes. And I believe that there was an RBED scheme in Wales, there was the Peabody scheme in London, and a couple of other schemes where unscrupulous contractors, let's just say, had specified poor materials into properties that weren't suitable. So the Bonfield report, I don't think factors in Eco4 per se, but the Bonfield report definitely factored into a radical change in the eco market that took place at the end of Eco2. And that was really to introduce better consumer protection by bringing in the likes of Trustmark to put some governance framework around installers that were working on government-funded schemes.
So Trustmark is, from what I understand, is a body basically. So when you do the submissions, when you've done an installation, it takes all of that data centrally.
In their data lake, they call it now. It used to be called a data warehouse, but they've gone lake now. So I'm assuming that's bigger than a warehouse.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm sure Trustmark wouldn't forgive you for just saying they just do the lodgements. They do an awful lot more as well.
Bad Nick. Sorry.
They register participants in the eco industry. So you have to have a Trustmark registration. You can't operate in this industry without it, and they also police it. So they do assessments and desktop assessments on some measures. They make sure that the retrofit coordinators who are involved in the process have correctly assessed the property and correctly recorded the information, and then that they've also evidenced what work has been done. And they also go out and do on-site visits, particularly for high-risk measures such as external solid wall insulation, which sort of, if I go back to the Bonfield review, that started the whole set of standards by which we're now governed, which is the PAS, the publicly available specification, which the current iteration of is PAS 2035 2019 and PAS 2030 2019. And that's a set of standards. PAS 2035 is for design, PAS 2030 is for install standards.
And do you think the PAS framework is working well?
What do I think about it? I'm not scared of regulation because what we do is exemplary. So I've never been scared of it. I actually want people to go and look at my work. I want people to go and audit my stuff. I want people to see what work that we're doing. I think the issue with the PAS process and the retrofit design and coordination process is that it's costly and it's expensive. And the proposed changes to PAS 2035, which come into effect on the 1st of April 2025, are going to increase the amount of involvement that the retrofit coordinators have. And I think that could be a bit of a pinch point because obviously if you're spending a lot of money on professional services, you're spending less money, arguably, on the measure. But what I think that the work that Trustmark are doing and the PAS standards are doing and the various accreditation bodies is to try and drive the cowboy element, the crooks and villains out of this industry because they see it as a bit of a gravy train, a way to make money, but they're exploiting vulnerable people. And I don't like that. So I've sort of made it a bit of my life's work, really, to root these people out.
Good. That's why we like having you here, Rachel. That's why we like having you here. But I've got a question on the eligibility criteria. Just last question there. So in terms of there's from my understanding, there's an element there of certain entitlements that people can be on, but also there's an income threshold. But what happens, say, if someone's on the margin of that income threshold or the entitlements that they receive, is there things there that will capture those people, or do people kind of fall through the funding criteria?
A lot of people fall through the gaps. I mean, in the previous Eco 3...
And what do you think about that? Do you think that's wrong? Do you think we should make it more flexible?
It's interesting that the income threshold on HUG has just been increased to 36,000 for joint household income, and it still remains 31,000 for local authority flexible eligibility. So I think that's probably something that could be looked at just to kind of like get those two things aligned. The issue with ECO is that the previous ECO disability benefits qualified, they were taken out of ECO 4. So it really is just the means tested benefits. So you really have to be exceptionally facing hardship to access the grant. And I don't know, the average salary for an individual in this country is £33,000. But to qualify for ECO, you need to have a joint income of £31,000, which to me sounds like that whoever's earning money in that household is really not even making minimum wage. But people do fall through the gap. So if you think about the original eligibility pool of being in receipt of means-tested benefits, which is the way ECO is structured, or qualifying through local authority flex, your household then needs to qualify. So if you don't have a low enough energy efficiency rating to get to the minimum requirement, so F and G need to go to D, and D and E need to go to C to meet the ECO minimum requirement. So you've got a big eligibility pool, and then you narrow that down a little bit by putting the minimum requirement in, and then you put a whole raft of other rules to do with tenure, to do with, there's other things that would potentially stop your household qualifying. So you make the eligible pool even smaller. And then you add in the complexities of whole house retrofit. I actually think that probably of the people that could be eligible for ECO, I did some basic maths. I think probably only about 16% of people are actually eligible. So I think what the government's tried to do is bring in GBIS, which is the Great British Insulation Scheme. which covers most fabric measures. Although if you are in the priority group, in other words, if you're Eco4 eligible, but you don't have enough measures to get a whole house retrofit done, then you can get heating controls, but effectively you can only get one fabric measure. So you've got your choices: loft, cavity, external or internal, or room in roof, underfloor. You can get one fabric measure done. We, as a managing agent, fund all of them, but the scoring for GBIS is the scores are really tiny. And you have to do it to the PAS standard. So you're going to have all of your retrofit costs, your retrofit assessment cost, your retrofit design cost, your retrofit coordination cost. Then you've got to look at the ventilation strategy for the property. So you're probably going to spend £1,200 before you even start putting some insulation in the loft. And if you're living in a mid-terraced house, you're probably only going to get 800 quid. But you've spent 1,200, and then you've got to buy materials and pay someone to go and put it in the house. So GBIS at the moment, the market rates are pretty reasonable for GBIS, above impact assessment, again, as eco has been for a while. But some properties just don't work. So people fall through the net there as well. I'm a big believer in helping people. I'm a big believer in alleviating fuel poverty. And, I looked at some stats yesterday. Fuel poverty costs the NHS £2.5 billion a year. £2.5 billion. It's like, that's what it costs to treat people with...
From adverse health outcomes.
Adverse
from living
health outcomes
in poorly...
From living in cold...
Properties,
cold homes. We're the fifth richest economy in the world, I believe. It's the 21st century, and we've got people self-disconnecting because they can't afford to top up their meter. And, I've seen people taking a heater around their home, particularly elderly people. They'll warm that room up because that's all they can afford. I was in Shropshire a couple of weeks ago, and this guy was telling me that in the winter his bedroom is 11 degrees. That's like sleeping outside.
Or sometimes worse.
That's too cold.
Yeah.
It's too cold to have a healthy existence. So people do slip through the net, and I've done all of the iterations, and you're probably going to go into these questions. I'm probably already speaking ahead of time, so
that's podcast extra.
I'm not a professional.
That's podcast extra for that one. No, but I do. What I wanted to ask you though, actually, so people watching this podcast, and you've talked about people falling through, but what happens to the low middle earners out there who don't quite have the eligibility for eco at the moment? If you were to design a scheme that would work for a lot of people out there and be accessible, what sort of things is it a funding thing? Is it a complexity issue? Is it more private? Is it access of private sector, low interest money?
Bigger than that. I think the problem with fuel poverty legislation is always brought in on the back of climate change legislation. So, and arguably, the two don't match, because if you've got people living in fuel poverty, they're not really damaging the planet too much, are they?
Because they're not heating their...
because they're not burning any carbon.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think because of this, like, there's a tension in legislation between climate change legislation and fuel poverty legislation. And so the two things don't necessarily mash together. So when the policy is brought in for the legislation that's required to support these schemes, there's lots of different people with different agendas trying to pit something in the pot. I think Eco4, it was too early for a whole house retrofit. Rather than incentivizing multiple measures by doing uplifts, it downshifts you if you don't do multiple measures. There's a lot of homes that don't have multiple measures. The scoring is based on RD-SAP, which is a really blunt instrument. RD-SAP favours heating, always has done. You get 30 points for a heating system and 4 points for external wall insulation when you're working out the scores. So there's a whole raft of issues, I think, I think it's pretty flawed in its design. I understand what the government have tried to do by bringing in GBIS. If people are in that group that you discussed, the people that are just on kind of normal incomes, just want a bit of work done, get some help from the government, then they probably could benefit from GBIS, because GBIS has a general eligibility group as well. Mm-hmm. So if you're in EPC band D to G, sorry, and you're in council tax band A to E, then you can access one measure on GBIS. So you can get loft insulation, cavity wall insulation. Primarily, they're the two measures that are done. But I guess if I was going to design a scheme, I'd actually help people in the way they needed to be helped, rather than looking at this. I think there's something like 6.5 million solid wall properties in this country, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong.
8.
Is it 8?
8, with I think about 150,000. I should know, yeah. About 150,000 been done. So only.
It's a drop in the ocean.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that every scheme has kind of been watered down over time, so that it's just always been low-hanging fruit. And here we are again with Eco4, which is just hitting the low-hanging fruit, because I did some numbers for you. It's like 58,000 boiler replacements on a whole house retrofit scheme, because that's the way the scoring works. You know, the industry has to go where the money is.
But 58,000 is peanuts.
Well, I agree with you, and that's under Eco4. I have got some figures here, and it's quite interesting. 58,000 boiler upgrades, and 56,000 loft insulations. But solid wall insulation we have here at 34,000. That's internal and external into 8 million solid wall houses.
It's not enough.
And by definition, because of the way energy prices are, unless you're pretty well off, you're going to be in fuel poverty. Because fuel poverty means when you're spending more than 10% of your income after housing costs on heating your home. And when I say heating your home, I mean maintaining an adequate heating regime, which is 21 degrees in living areas and 18 degrees in sleeping areas. That's what an adequate heating regime is. So if you think of, even with the energy price cap and the fact that there's been a reduction, and the fact that we're all celebrating the 2% inflation that has arrived on our news feeds this morning, you need to be earning quite a lot of money after your housing costs, particularly when, you know, I was looking at some properties yesterday. These are apartments. Their average cost to heat their apartments, because they're solid wall with inadequate heating, is £3,368 a year. That's what it costs them to heat their homes per annum. That's now people's second biggest expense after their housing costs. It used to be council tax. Now it's your energy bill. People just can't afford it.
Yes.
So, you know, if you think about someone who's on a normal income, 33,000, let's say they're spending 50% of that on their housing costs, that leaves them about 15 grand. Take off 3 grand that they've had to pay an income tax on that leaves them 10 grand. Their 3 grand is 30% of what they've got left after housing costs. This is normal people, and people do fall through the gaps.
So just, I mean, looking a little bit forward to the next few weeks. So we're in the midst of a general election, and I guess we are probably going to get a major change for the first time in a decent while of time.
14 years, apparently.
And what I've always seen from history is when there is such a big change, there's a tendency to kind of chop and change or design things from the beginning. And just kind of talking on the theme of GBIS, would you say it's good that it's there, but then, you know, whoever's coming in and looking at that, rather than kind of chop and change, perhaps kind of look into it and augment what's already there and repurpose it a bit?
I mean, it's very interesting, because the current incumbent of government are spending around about £4 billion on eco, and if you add in other programmes, they're spending about 2.8 billion, so maybe 6.8 billion, and that's over a sort of 3-4 year period.
That's HUGs and
ECO's
SHDFs.
4 years, so yes, Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, Home Upgrade Grant and Local Authority Delivery, which is going to be resurrected, I believe, next year as LAD5. I think it was going to be called LARS. I don't know what LARS stands for. That's the first acronym I've not known today. Wow.
First acronym of 20 years. Rachel, how could you?
I speak fluent acronym.
How could you?
Me. I've lost my position now in my head.
So do we repurpose it? Do we repurpose GBIS?
So,
what do we do? What?
If I were the new government, likely to be the new government, I think I've got bigger fish to fry than the low carbon retrofit, energy efficiency, climate change agenda. Now, it's interesting when you look at the manifestos. You've obviously got the far right that want to scrap all of this. To quote David Cameron, and no, I said I wouldn't swear, but the green crap. They want to scrap the green crap. So they're looking at saying climate change isn't a thing, and it's not anthropogenic, and people shouldn't be taxed out of existence to mitigate it. So they want to throw it in the bin. You've then got the Green parties that want to spend £50 billion a year, I believe, was in their manifesto. That's quite a lot of cash, I think. To commit. It was particularly when we're nudging a national debt that sits about 99% of GDP at the moment. And then you've got the Tories spending this about £2 billion a year-ish. And apparently the people that might win, the Labour Party,
Team Red, yeah.
I don't know what the Lib Dems are doing, actually. I probably should have found that out. But last time I saw the leader of the Liberal Democrats, he was like on a wakeboard or paddleboard or something. Although I think the leader of the Tory party was looking at sheep yesterday, and they all ran away, which I thought was quite entertaining. But I think the Labour Party are looking at spending about £6 billion a year. And that is a manifesto pledge. Now I know there was some bonkers maths before that, and it was 26 billion, but I'll take 6 billion. Because I think that's probably an appropriate amount to be spending. It's affordable. It can be costed in. I don't think there's going to be any radical changes to eco legislation. You have to remember with eco, it has to go. It's an act of parliament, so it has to. There has to be a bill. That bill has to be read. It then has to be read in both houses. It then goes for royal assent, and then it becomes legislation. So it's a statutory instrument. So. I don't think they're going to be queuing up on day one when the whole country is falling apart around our ears and go, best have a quick look at eco. So I think,
or redesign it, or do anything crazy like that. Yeah,
I don't think anything crazy is going to happen unless some bizarre political mishap goes on in this country. I think.
So perhaps another scheme to kind of augment what we've.
And I think also you have to understand that most of these schemes are administered by civil servants.
Yeah.
They'll just carry on. They'll do their job. It doesn't matter which colour their boss is. They'll go do whatever they've got to do. And the policymakers will probably take some time to get policy in. So I think Eco4 is going to pretty much remain the same. I think GBIS will remain. The issue we have in the market at the moment is there's 1,200 participants that are looking to provide eco grants to households, and there's 11 people buying the carbon credits that are resultant. And so it's a really, really, I'm going to say dynamic. I probably should replace that with distressing, disturbing, difficult. But yeah, it's a really dynamic market at the moment. So it's difficult for the downstream supply chain, these guys that are out there putting in, loft insulation, EWI, boiler upgrades, air source heat pumps under eco. Because at the moment they're curtailing their activities because there's a bit of a dearth of funding in the market. And I think some of that is to do with the potential for political change. But really, this stuff takes ages to get through. That's why we've had all of these interims and transitions, because it's been hiatus between schemes really since I was a young girl.
But as you said, the civil service are the permanent bit of government. So it kind of, yes, it does matter, where it's Team Blue or Team Red or Team Yellow, but ultimately they're the ones that carry on the policy, and it's always tricky to do kind of full 180 turns is how I see it. So I think it will continue, but then, as you said, it'll be more funding and hopefully it will augment what's already there.
Yeah, I think we've probably got to ride out the rest of this year up until Christmas, really, with this difficult market. When you've only got 11 people to sell your measures to, because there's only 11 obligated suppliers that are currently participating. I think there's technically 12, but one of them isn't currently participating. If they make a commercial decision, and you have to understand these are commercial organisations, and it may be that their risk team says, well, actually, we might have a change of government, so let's not spend anything on that. You know, it's the first time we've ever had a 4-year obligation. They're usually 3 years. So it's a 4-year obligation. We've got time to catch up. Let's just see what happens with the political side. We won't spend any money for a few months, and then we'll release some budgets in September, October. The problem is, you know, it's pretty much a hand-to-mouth industry. So, you know, the supply chain might not exist.
Yes.
When they want to come back into the market. So.
Well, listen, Rachel, that's awesome discussion about kind of the industry at 20,000 feet. But let's go back to your organisation a little bit, sort of towards the kind of back end of this podcast. So BidConnecter itself, and talking about the measures themselves. In BidConnecter's existence, what's the most popular install measures that you've done? What's the broad number of measures that you install, and how's it been going the last 12 months or so?
I think that certainly for us and for me, my passion is fabric, because whilst it's very exciting to do clean heat and microgeneration, which are all the sexy technologies out there, arguably, if you don't sort the fabric out, then you're probably pretty much wasting your time. I think my nan would have said fur coat and no knickers, this sort of approach. So where we excel as a business is by doing fabric improvements, and primarily into fairly complicated properties. So we did a recent property in Shropshire that was made of cob, which is poo, I think. I'm not too sure what cob's made of, but it's very old and it's all stuck together. And mudstone, and with a timber frame top. We had to work out a way of putting in a framework within there to put some internal wall insulation in, so that we could get the walls straight enough so that they could have their air source heat pump. And it's interesting, the guy that did the work, when he pulled up on site that morning with his lads in the van, he said, I hope you've brought your imaginations. Because they would have to be super creative to work out how to make this cob and mudstone and timber frame property thermally efficient. And we did another property just down the road from here in Worthing that had a beautiful Victorian facade. Coin bricks. It had some architrave around the windows. It had the most beautiful arrangement of detail around the door. But it was freezing. It was a beautiful house. Freezing cold. Could not get the internal temperature above 17 degrees ever. It didn't really matter how much they ran the heating, what the thermostat was on. It was freezing. 3-storey Victorian house. But they didn't want external wall insulation. They wanted to keep their beautiful Victorian house with all its amazing features. So we came up with a solution. We did external wall insulation on the back and internal wall insulation on the front. And that hybrid approach means they got a stunning outcome. It was your product, of course.
Have they done have they had a heating season in there since you've done?
No, but well, it's always a heating season, because I'll be honest, it was like
it's been freezing. Yeah, true. It's been freezing last week.
I had my heating on last night. So.
Yeah,
but no, they haven't. They'll be going into it this winter.
Okay,
but they already said
that's probably already a difference.
Already
isn't it?
said it's made such a difference. I mean, they left us an amazing review and actually mentioned EWI Pro that they were in love with your product. So,
well, just on solid wall measures. So whether it's internal or external, what are you seeing anecdotally? Because whenever I've spoken to customers, they're seeing, and this is no jokes, no lie, and it's no exaggeration, is their heating bills are going down by more than a half.
Well, it's interesting you say that because
you get the comfort factor as well. You're getting rid of the draft, so people feel more comfortable.
So you're improving the airtightness, so it feels better for a start. You also, when we do fabric improvements, we look at the background ventilation and we let them have controlled ventilation, because controlled ventilation is good for energy efficiency, and
no insulation without ventilation
is really bad for energy efficiency. Yeah. But it really is like wrapping your home up, and it makes an immediate difference. I mean, when we were doing this house just down the road from here, just with the insulation on the wall, the household already noticed a difference. So I think we just did that job in around February, so it was still pretty cold at the time, and they immediately noticed a difference. The lady that lives there works from home and has to have one of those personal electric blankets wrapped around her so that she can actually function during the day, and I think she's hoping to put that in the mothballs now. But I mean, I've got some examples. We did a video
in Shropshire
earlier on the year in Shropshire with Clive.
Oh yeah.
58 years he's lived in his home.
Yes.
And he'd never used all the rooms because it was too cold.
And he would only bathe X amount of days because of it was just too bloody cold.
Yeah. So, and with the addition of external wall insulation, his quote at the end of the video was, "Look at us now, we're living in luxury."
Yes, very touching.
It shouldn't be luxurious to live in a warm, affordable, energy efficient home, but it's luxury for Clive. I had another lady, Sheila in Eastbourne. This is a few years ago now, and when we went to look at her she had an apartment. It's like a duplex built on top of another apartment in a weird sort of arrangement just near Eastbourne seafront. And the only thing that was giving her any insulation value in her loft was the sand that had blown up from the sea under her roof tiles. That was her insulation. And we did internal wall insulation there. We did room in roof insulation. We put a new boiler in for her. And she still emails me from time to time. I probably did that about 6 years ago. She still emails me from time to time. But that year, she had her first holiday in 23 years. She couldn't afford to go on holiday because she was giving that money to her energy company. So that's the difference. But I think that certainly with external wall insulation, some of the properties we've done in Shropshire visually transformed. They look stunning afterwards. And these are properties that have probably got some defects that arguably should be hidden. But I think that the most rewarding ones for me are the ones that look different but the same. So we kind of keep them looking just like they looked, but now they're more energy efficient. And that's probably one of the benefits of working with your product, because people are loving it. So
goes nicely onto my next question, and let's see how well you know your company inside out. So what would you say your top 3 core values are? And I've got Emily in the back of the room, so she'll just nod if you got them right, and she'll shake her head if you haven't got.
It's very interesting you ask about our values, because we recently had a management offsite, and it was the first time I'd seen the values. And the reason it's the first time I've seen the values is not because I don't believe in them, is because that Emily has been working with that. We've got a committee, and the committee had spent quite a long time working on the values. And I'll be honest with you, I can't tell you them off by heart.
But what would you surmise them at? What's the 3 most important things that you're?
I think our compassion, our warmth, our professionalism. I think that we are also a business that really, we have integrity. So those are the things that are most important to me. And I think we've got about 7 values, and I've probably just about nailed 4 of them. I'm sure.
Emily was nodding there, profusely, so it was amazing. Yeah.
But we're ethical in what we do. But most importantly, the customer is king.
Yeah.
And, if I ever speak to somebody on site, the first question I ask is, how's the customer? How they feeling? That's what we're all about, the customer, because we want our customers to have the best experience, because arguably we're taking their house apart.
Yeah.
It's disruptive, it's noisy, it's messy. It's, there's some people, we're finishing an internal wall insulation project in Shropshire today where we've been there living with these people for 5 weeks. Living, literally. No, not live, because obviously go to gigs in the evening. But you feel like you become part of the family. And it's really important that you respect the customer and their home and how they live in their home. And this particular customer's got a daughter who's autistic, doesn't like loud noises and things like that. So we've tried to kind of build our working patterns around her need to be in the home when she's not at school. And they're so grateful that we did that. So I think it's about that kind of compassion, about what we're about as a business, but our customers are the top of our tree. And that's whether they're business to business customers, they're installers that are working with us and they're providing us with eco measures for eco submissions. It's whether it's our supply chain of installers that we've crafted over many years. We look after them, but the people that matter are the people that benefit from the services we offer, and our customers are the most important thing to us. So I guess they're at the top of our tree.
And because you've worked in numerous different industries, what do you particularly find as most rewarding aspect of being in this
helping
industry?
People? That's, I was going to write on my hand, do not swear today, because
It's all right.
even
Seb's amazing. We can do all sorts of things with this.
Even somebody as gracious and elegant as I, I've tried to tone down my Cockney twang today.
Because you are a Londoner.
It's a frustrating place to be. And I have days where I literally go home and I think, why do I do this to myself? Why am I still doing this after 22 years? But then I think of the Clives and I think of the Sheilas and I think of the lady in Shropshire who wrote to us after we'd done external wall on her house and said, I can't believe it, but my daughters now come into the living room in the evening and we do Netflix and chill. We sit there, we watch movies, we do stuff together as a family. Because previously when they came home from school, they went straight to their bedrooms so they could get under their duvets to stay warm. Yeah. That's so even in the toughest day, the hardest day, the day where, life has thrown so much at you, the fact that you can really make a difference to people's lives, it's transformative. I happened to catch, I never put the TV on in the morning before I go to work, but for some reason I had the TV on. I might have been waiting for, I think I was waiting for a Sky engineer or something. So I had the TV on. And I happened to be watching the BBC. And they were doing some article on an estate in Gamesley, which is it's the Gamesley estate, it's near Stockport. And I thought, well, I recognise that. And then I realised that there was a youth initiative there. They'd started to do some after-school activities for kids. There were some sports activities, some arts activities and things like that. And it was on this estate that I did insulation work for under CESP, the Community Energy Saving Programme, 12 years ago. And this was a carbuncle, this place. This is the most beautiful area. It's absolutely gorgeous, this part of the country. But for some reason, the planners had approved, probably 50, 60 years ago, this big blob of grey wimpy no-fines, well, brown wimpy no-fines houses that were freezing, that had rubbish windows, that had bad heating. And working with British Gas at the time, I managed to do a project there. And we did on 190 houses, we did external wall insulation, and we put new windows in. And I remember it being quite complicated because these Wimpey No Fines properties had a steel ring beam, so we had to work out how we were going to deal with a thermal bridge in, and the new windows sat forward because obviously we put them on the insulation line, so it left a little strip of carpet that we had to try and find for all of these people to make a new threshold under their windows. But I remember, first of all, I was looking.
You created an architectural feature.
First of all, I was looking and thinking, oh, it all looks really good after 12 years. Good colours, really crisp. No evident problems because the BBC panned around the estate. But then I was looking at these kids who were being interviewed, and when I was on site 12 years ago, they would have been getting pushed past in their buggies by their parents, and now they're on the BBC talking about how excited they are about their youth club and about how their community is such a great community.
Yes.
And how the communities come together.
Amazing.
And I sort of thought, I really hope they had better life opportunities and better life choices because they were living in warm houses. And that's the difference. It might only be 190 houses in Gamesley. I think over my career I've probably helped several 100,000 people to access grants, but it makes a difference. And I thought, well, I did that. I'm proud of that. So helping people, I guess, in a long and convoluted answer to your question.
Well, Rach, that's a beautiful summary. I called you about 3 weeks ago trying to set up this podcast 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was thinking at the end of it, I was like, crikey, your life is absolutely manic and hectic. So tell us your typical Monday to Friday. What does Rachel Cole do in BidConnecter?
Wow. So I'm the commercial director. So I'm responsible for all of the pricing that comes in or goes out of the building. So I not only buy carbon credits from energy companies, I also look at every single price that leaves the building. So we've got a good process. I've got a QS. We've got somebody that does pricing. They put together a bill of quants. The QS looks at it. Then it comes to me for approval. I do that mainly because I'm a control freak. But I also do it
In a good way.
Well, I guess in a good way. I think to survive in this industry is a pretty good character trait. So I do all of the pricing. I also do all of our bids and tenders that we have, and I'm also responsible for making sure that we're delivering enough revenue on a monthly basis to make sure that we continue to grow and be sustainable as a business. And that probably sounds like, well, that's probably going to take her half an hour. What do you do for the rest of the time?
Well, you're here on the podcast.
But for the rest of the time, I'm usually dealing with challenges. So
Yeah.
it's really weird. My day doesn't usually start before 10 o'clock because it doesn't usually end before 8 o'clock. So because my day builds, because when I leave the office at 8:30 at night, I have no emails left to deal with. My day builds. They don't come in at between 7 and 8 in the morning. They start coming in about 10, 11, and then 100 emails will arrive, and they're usually problems. So I do bilateral calls with the energy companies, and I probably do 3 of those a week. I talk to Shropshire Council at least once a week. So I probably have probably 10 or 15 different Teams calls that I have to do. And, the rest of the time I'm pretty much playing professional whack-a-mole because as soon as one problem goes away, another one pops up. So that's really what I do. But yeah, I guess being a commercial director, I probably could just style it out, do 2 or 3 days a week and spend a lot of time in Dubai. But no, I tend to work 70 hours a week.
But also the luxury is because you live by the coast, actually, because we've got pretty good long days. You can take a walk on the beach and relax, after your long...
I live 100 yards away from a beach in a village called Rustington, which is, people used to go on holiday to Rustington in the sort of 50s and 60s. It was a seaside town. Oh, no, seaside village is not a town. People in Rustington would hate me for saying it's a town. But it's got things like a convalescent home on the coast where people would have been pushed out in their bath chairs at some point in the Victorian times. But it's a fantastic place to live, and I'm 100 yards from the beach. So you know what? When it just becomes just so much, too much, I just go for a walk on the beach. So I've got one of those chairs. I call it a Harry Banana chair. But I don't think that's what it's called.
Opens up, does it?
It's like a little beach chair.
Oh, right.
But you can put it on your back like a Ghostbuster.
Oh, okay.
So, and I kind of like stick it on my back, walk down the beach, have a little, probably a small drop of wine in my chili bottle.
Good. Take
a book, take the chair, and I'm there. And that transports me away from the stresses of life until I go back to them. So yeah, it's quite handy living that close to the sea.
Well, listen, projecting 10 years' time, what would you like people to say about Rachel Cole?
Well, it's interesting.
Hardest question.
Well, because it's difficult for me to say in my language without swearing. Actually, I'm going to say she cared, and because I do. I mean, we went on this management retreat, and we all did our personality types. And we got an external.
Do you get is it purple, green? What's that one?
No, I'm not a colour. We got descriptions, and I'm an ENFJ, which apparently only 9% of the population are. And there's more psychopaths than there are ENFJs, interestingly. But it means I'm the provider. That is my description of what I do, and I guess that's what I do. I'm a provider. But yeah, I cared. I've always cared. I've got a mantra in life that we should always be better. Even if you just make a small improvement, you just got to learn from your mistakes. You've got to improve things. If you just get a little bit better every day, listen, no one's going to be like super brilliant overnight because it doesn't happen that way. But what does happen is you make small improvements, and then you kind of learn from things. But yeah, I was going to say my obituary will be she gave a beep. But we'll go with...
Well, hopefully not in 10 years' time, you know. Hopefully we've been enjoying a beach.
Listen, 10 years is a long time in this industry.
Okay. Well, listen, Rachel, it's been absolutely phenomenal having you here on this interview, learning about BidConnecter, your business, where, you know, how it's gone from strength to strength, because you're definitely a leader in the space, a woman leader. You're inspiring other women to kind of get into it. You've done some phenomenal things, and, you know, I do hope, and obviously I wish you and your staff all the best for success for the future. And I know you guys are going to be absolutely successful. You are successful. You're going to go from strength to strength. And yeah, let's hope to do this again some very time soon.
Yeah, and you know, maybe I'll give you more chance to ask more questions.
Yes,
being quite so chatty. I'm from the East.
This is what it's all about. No, it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be a natural interview, which I think we've had today. So I do thank you for your time. And as I said, let's do this again sometime soon.
Amazing. Thank you.